Hello, and welcome to this Veeam Trailblazer Talk brought to you by Cast and by Veeam and produced by Actual Tech Media. Our topic today is Kubernetes backup and disaster recovery, the defense you're missing. My name is Keith Ward. I'm with Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event. Now, before we get to today's great content, we do have a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. That Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, and slide advancement issues, but if that doesn't work, let us know in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Secondly, in the handouts section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we are offering several resources. I'd especially like to draw your attention to two valuable resources from Cast and by Veeam. There's a Kubernetes backup and recovery for dummies book, and you'll also find a primer on DevOps. You'll also find links to the Gorilla Guide Book Club, where you can get access to Actual Tech Media's great printed resources on technology topics, as well as a link to the ATM Events Center, which has our calendar of upcoming events. I encourage you to access those resources now and share them with your friends and colleagues. Now, third, at the end of this webinar event, we'll be awarding a $300 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. Now, the official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handouts section. Scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. And finally, one of the best benefits of this event is the opportunity to ask a question of our expert presenters. To help encourage your questions, we have a special additional prize for you. That's another Amazon gift card, this one for $50 for the best question. At the end of the event, we'll look at all the questions, pick out the very best one, and contact that prize winner. And with that out of the way, let's get to today's fantastic content. It's my pleasure to bring on our presenter today, Adam Berg, who works on cloud-native technical partnerships for Cast and by Veeam. And now I'm going to turn things over to Adam.
Hi, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Adam Berg, and I'm with Cast and by Veeam. Today's webinar is called Kubernetes Backup and DR, the Defense You're Missing. I'm really glad you've chosen to spend some time with me today talking about this really important topic. There's a lot to talk about here, so let's get right into it. I want to first start off, though, with a bit of a discussion around industry trends and where we've been as an industry and where we're going, because I really think that colors a lot of what we're about to talk about today. Now, if you've been around the industry, quite a while, like I have, you've seen the evolution of the data center. And pre-2000s, of course, the data center looked a lot like these big monolithic servers. We had a single operating system running a single application. So think of like your mainframe type of applications. And we really saw a huge fundamental shift in the early 2000s with the advent of the hypervisor and virtualization. Now, VMware didn't invent the concept of virtualization, but they brought it to the masses. And the way that they were able to do this was by bringing an orchestration layer to the capabilities of all the goodness that being able to run multiple operating systems on top of a single piece of hardware brought to us. With the advent of virtualization, now we had a singular problem that really became the concept of how do I orchestrate all of the virtual machines? How do I handle things like VM sprawl? The advent of vCenter and vSphere really became the de facto way to handle the amount of VMs that organizations were now able to create. And but this again brought an even greater problem. How do I manage all of these Windows operating systems? How do I manage all of these Linux operating systems when it comes to a security posture? How do I maintain patching up to date? How do I secure all the vulnerabilities and all the OSs that are now being deployed on top of my infrastructure? It's a tall task, and one that we're still sort of grappling with as an industry as well. One of the common solutions that we're seeing now the industry moving to is this concept of containers or containerized applications. The concept of containers really is separating the application away from the operating system that contains it. So now I really just want applications, and that's really what's important to my organization. So why do I need dozens or even hundreds of operating systems when I really just want dozens or hundreds of applications being deployed? I have Docker up here. Now, Docker, again, didn't invent the concept of containerized applications, but again, they're the ones that are popularizing it and bringing this concept to the masses. But again, like when virtualization first came out, we've got a similar problem now. We've got container sprawl instead of VM sprawl, and we need a way to manage all of these containers and orchestrate the deployment and scalability of all these applications. And in steps Kubernetes. Now, if hopefully you've heard of Kubernetes, you're here on today's webinar. Kubernetes really came out of a project from Google. Google open sourced their container orchestration methodology and gave it to the community, and they called it Kubernetes. And Kubernetes is, it's kind of a funny word. It comes from, I believe, it's Greek for helmsman, right? So you'll see a lot of nautical terms and things like that with Kubernetes, of course, being the logo, being a ship, helmsman's steering, right, from a ship. Kubernetes has sort of become the de facto winner in the container orchestration space. So if you want to think about Kubernetes as sort of a vSphere analog for containers, right? It's the ability to manage all of our containers, manage the security and access credentials around containers, the scheduling and scalability of containers. That's really what Kubernetes is, and it's delivering on the promise of containers being the next generation way of the way that we're deploying applications, and what we're calling the cloud native approach to application deployment and development for most organizations. So what's driving the need for Kubernetes, and what's really driving the explosion in market growth in Kubernetes? Number one, it's the increased production use cases that organizations are finding for Kubernetes. It's the fastest growing infrastructure right now for enterprises. It's easy to see why, right? Kubernetes is solving a lot of challenges. Number one, it's taking the applications and making them more lightweight for organizations. It's allowing for more speed and efficiency of the deployment and creation of applications, right? We're now able to create methodologies through what we call CI/CD automation processes, which allow applications to be developed quicker, to be deployed faster, getting the changes out to the end users of the applications and the new capabilities, new features, the new bug fixes to the end users in a much faster way than we could ever do prior to containers and Kubernetes. It's really driving the growth here and the additional capabilities that Kubernetes is delivering. So what are the analysts saying about Kubernetes? Number one, they're saying that there are going to be 500 million new applications being deployed on top of containers and Kubernetes in the next by 2024. That's more than the last 40 years combined. 500 million new apps. 75% of enterprises are stating that they're going to be running containerized applications by 2025, and organizations now, 52% of organizations out there are saying that we recognize that our traditional or legacy data protection and backup tooling is not appropriate for this new containerized world. So this new Kubernetes and cloud native application deployment world. So there's a lot of understanding that your existing capabilities just aren't adequate for the way that organizations want to deploy their applications. So what are organizations asking for really when they're talking about data protection for Kubernetes? Number one, organizations are asking for new tooling that is Kubernetes native, right? They're looking for tools that understand the native Kubernetes APIs, that understand the automation and workflows that developers are now implementing for the deployment of applications on top of Kubernetes and containers, right? So, this largely precludes the use of legacy type of applications, applications that are traditionally being used to protect their physical infrastructure, their virtualized infrastructure, or even some traditional apps being deployed in the public cloud. They're looking for applications that data protection applications that understand multi-layer consistency. So again, this is not something necessarily unique to the Kubernetes space, but multi-layer consistency means I need data protection that understands how to create consistency at the application layer, at the infrastructure and Kubernetes layer, all the way down to the storage layer for applications. So we need consistency of our data protection all the way throughout the 3 tiers of the application stack. Freedom of choice is huge in this space. Again, this is very much a open source community, meaning that things like Kubernetes can be deployed on top of multiple different public cloud providers. Bring your own infrastructure, on-premises infrastructure. There's different flavors of Kubernetes out there. Because it's open source, a lot of different providers have slightly different takes on Kubernetes, and there's slight variations in the way that these are being deployed. And organizations most commonly are deploying on top of different Kubernetes infrastructure. They might be doing multiple different public clouds. They might have a Kubernetes distribution on premises for dev test, and production might be up in one of their favorite cloud providers. So freedom of choice is very critical here, meaning that their tooling needs to understand every different flavor of Kubernetes, and the different infrastructure that Kubernetes can be deployed on top of is extremely important in this space. And understanding DevOps speed and scale. This is open source. Things are changing rapidly in this space, meaning that there's new versions and new capabilities to being deployed at a much more rapid pace than traditional infrastructure, so that the tooling also needs to understand DevOps speed and scale. And we call this shifting left, right? Moving that development cycle from what traditionally, if you're looking at a timeline, would be further down the right, and we're moving this further to the left. It's much faster paced. The release cycles are much shorter, and consequently, the tooling needs to follow that same development and deployment model. And the organizations that are deep into Kubernetes already understand that the threat of ransomware is real still in this new cloud native space. This is not something that goes away just because you have a new paradigm for your deployment of your infrastructure, right? Whereas I think most people are understanding that ransomware is a pretty major threat out there for traditional infrastructure environments. This is not something that changes once you've moved to cloud native and to Kubernetes and containers. We're already seeing sophisticated attacks already on Kubernetes environments. Now, the overall footprint out there of Kubernetes is much smaller than traditional, let's say, VMware or virtualized infrastructure or physical infrastructure, right? So the number of attacks are fewer, but are growing in this space. And what are the top cloud native security challenges out there that that we see here at CASA? Number one, of course, misconfigurations. This is a new space. So a lot of infrastructure engineers out there that are deploying Kubernetes. Maybe it's their first time deploying this type of infrastructure. Misconfiguration, especially around least privilege separation, default passwords, not understanding how credentials and secrets work within the Kubernetes space. A lack of visibility in this space, meaning that the new infrastructure is highly complex and much different than traditional infrastructure. So understanding how different containers and pods communicate with each other, and understanding how to create security separation in between things like namespaces and pods is something that's still a challenge right now for the industry. And of course, advanced persistent threats. That's zero-day bugs, things like ongoing persistent hacks, even things like traditional way of gaining access through like phishing attacks is still a problem here in the cloud native space, right? So traditional advanced persistent threats and sophisticated attacks are still occurring even on this new wave of infrastructure. So keep that in mind when you're starting to roll out this kind of infrastructure for your organization. So let's talk about who Kasten by Veeam is, and what we do, and how we're helping our partners and our clients tackle some of these problems. So who we are. So Kasten by Veeam is really all about tackling what we call day two data management challenges and helping enterprises confidently run applications and actually get to production. And the way that we do that is by being best of breed at three core capabilities. And that's number one, it's backup and restore for applications being deployed on top of Kubernetes. Full disaster recovery for clusters, and we're going to be talking about that some more here in today's webinar. And of course, application mobility, being able to move applications in between different Kubernetes clusters, different underlying infrastructure, completely different Kubernetes versions and distributions, right? This is a key capability in the cloud native space, being able to take an application that's being developed in one cluster and moving it into production that's on a completely different set of infrastructure. Different public cloud, for example, is a key capability. And we'll be talking about how Kasten by Veeam is able to deliver on those capabilities. So you're in the right place. You're talking to the market leader in this space today. And that's not just me saying that. That's the industry recognizing that Kasten K10, K10 is the name of the product by Kasten, is the market leader in this space. A recent industry analyst report on the state of Kubernetes data protection tools lists Kasten K10 as the most mature, the most feature capable, and the number one product in this space. So go ahead and take a look for the if you're looking for this report, you can find that at our website kasten.io. But the report is by GigaOm, and that's the state of Kubernetes data protection tools, and that was released just this year, so it's very fresh. So let's get a little bit further into the product, and that's Kasten K10. So again, Kasten K10 is the number one tool in the Kubernetes data protection space, and the way that we describe this product is a purpose-built for Kubernetes. It's a data management platform, and what we're delivering here is really enterprise scale, something that's easy to use, and it's delivering on that promise of a completely secure way and capable way of delivering backup and restore, full disaster recovery, and application mobility for Kubernetes applications. Kasten K10 is built for Kubernetes. Remember what we talked about, one of the main asks that customers are saying that they want from a data protection tool for Kubernetes is they want a tool that's cloud native and built for Kubernetes. Kasten K10 is built from the ground up specifically for Kubernetes data protection. This is something that integrates natively with the Kubernetes APIs and is built on cloud native architectural principles, right? So this is something that is not a bolt-on to a legacy product. This is something that's a dedicated product just for your applications living in Kubernetes. Here at Kasten, we take security extremely seriously. So what you get right out of the box is the most robust role-based access controls, the most robust authentication methodologies, and industry standard encryptions enabled completely by default. And we're the first tool in the industry to deliver ransomware data protection for Kubernetes with our support for object lock immutable APIs for S3 object storage as our preferred method of data protection. We'll talk a bit more about that here in an upcoming slide. We support the richest ecosystem in the industry, right? We talked about that freedom of choice as a huge capability request from the industry. We need to be able to support every Kubernetes distribution. Every infrastructure that supports Kubernetes needs to be supported, and all the most popular applications being deployed on Kubernetes, we need to support those as well. So Kasten K10 by Veeam has the richest ecosystem of support across the industry that you will find. And then we give all of this and we make all of this available to you. We make it very easy to use, right? We have state-of-the-art user interface supporting multi-cluster capabilities, so I can manage all of my clusters from a single pane of glass. We're easy to install, but we also integrate natively with the native Kubernetes APIs. So if you want to deploy us as infrastructure as code, manage us through your CI/CD pipelines, that's all very easy to consume and extensible for Kasten K10. So let's dive a little bit more into those three main use cases that we talked about earlier, right? We talked about backup and restore as a key key component of what we're doing, right? Complete application protection, complete policy-driven backup data management with automation and monitoring built in, and application-specific protection. And we're going to get a little bit more into that, what I mean about application-specific protection. Full disaster recovery, right? This is something that you still need to think about when you're deploying this new paradigm of cloud-native infrastructure. We still need to protect our Kubernetes clusters like we would a vSphere cluster or a Hyper-V cluster, right? We want to be able to fail over an entire cluster in a completely infrastructure agnostic way, right? So one of the capabilities here might be failing over my on-premises Kubernetes distribution up to a public cloud distribution of Kubernetes for disaster recovery, and Kasten K10 is delivering a seamless failover for that disaster recovery event. And of course, application mobility, moving applications from one cluster to another. So we're creating complete application portability in an infrastructure agnostic way as well. And we'll talk about how we do that. So from that use case of backup and restore, hopefully, the reason why you need this is pretty obvious. We've got data. Data is the lifeblood of our organization. We need to protect it, right? So Kasten K10 is able to protect entire applications within Kubernetes environment in a completely granular way. So we have complete visibility into all the components that make up a application that as it's deployed on Kubernetes, and we're able to not only protect the entire application, but we're deliver granular recovery of that application. So being able to restore any individual component of the application, whether it be not only things like the pods and persistent volumes, but also the metadata like the service configurations, the secrets, the networking configurations. All of those things can be protected in a granular way for individual recovery. So the use case there might be to recover a misconfiguration with the application and not just the entire application itself. So this delivers complete SLA recovery for your organization as well. We're delivering multi-tenancy, role-based access control, polyglot persistence, which is just a fancy way of saying we're application aware all the way from the application all the way down to the storage layer. And we're delivering this all with enterprise scale and performance. Kasten K10 has the largest Kubernetes clusters in the world under data management. So we know enterprise scale and performance for data protection. And we're delivering all of this with built-in encryption turned on by default, but also dedupe and compression enabled by default on our backups. So you know that you're going to get the most efficient, space efficient long-term data protection in this space, in this area, in this industry today. Now, we mentioned that DR, and that's a big topic for today's webinar. How we're delivering a complete cluster disaster recovery is one of the unique capabilities here. So we're able to deliver not only cross-cloud disaster recovery in an integrated way with AWS and Azure and Google native integrations, but also the ability to do completely agnostic or dissimilar infrastructure DR failover. I can failover from an on-premises Veeam or Tanzu up to a public cloud provider, or from a SUSE Rancher deployment over to let's say a home boot, like an upstream Kubernetes distribution on a completely dissimilar infrastructure. Right, we're delivering that through what we call application and storage transformation capability. Some of the unique properties and capabilities of Kasten K10. The ability to, on demand, seamlessly change the capabilities of the infrastructure as we fail over. So, for example, I've got one storage infrastructure layer on premises. I need to change that to, let's say I'm failing over to AWS, EBS block storage. I need to be able to tell my applications that I've got a new storage infrastructure to deploy on top of when I do DR. So we're delivering all of that in a completely policy-driven and automated way. So this delivers easy DR for your organization so you can feel confident about getting into production and that you're able to survive a DR infrastructure failure type of event. And of course, application mobility, we talked a little bit about that. This again, we have the real capability here is also what our DR is built on, is the ability to do those transformations of those applications. I can take an application from one cluster, change any attribute of it as I'm moving it to another cluster, change the underlying storage class, change the ingress or networking capabilities of that application as it moves from one cluster to another. Right? This allows for things like application upgrades, cluster level upgrades, moving from dev test to production, moving from, you're retiring one cluster and moving it over to a different cluster. You need the ability to move applications, and Kasten K10 is delivering that in the industry best way. Right? We're the market leader in application mobility for Kubernetes clusters today. So let's get a little bit deeper into how Kasten works. Talk about application centricity and what that means. We're going to talk about policy-driven management and why that's important to your organization. That freedom of choice again, observability, our extensibility in the applications, and then delivering on comprehensive security. So if you're not super familiar with applications as they're deployed on top of Kubernetes, it's quite different than a traditional, let's say, a virtual machine, right? Virtual machines are usually sort of all-encompassing. Maybe you've got 1 or 2 or 3 virtual hard drives, right? And essentially that makes up a workload in the in a traditional infrastructure sense. Kubernetes applications are made up of many different pods, many different what we call persistent volumes and persistent volume claims, and all the underlying metadata like secrets and service configurations and deployment configurations and networking configurations are all pieces of metadata. So Kasten is able to look at an application in its entirety and protect all the components that make up that applications dynamically by talking to the native Kubernetes APIs, doing that automatic discovery of all the components that make up that application, and coordinating all of that for you to make that really, really easy. So when you protect an application, you know that we're getting all the components of that application to be able to not only restore the entire application, but you can pick and choose all the granular pieces of metadata that you might want to recover. If someone say, maybe you accidentally deleted a critical secret for that application, I can recover just that secret. Or maybe you modified the networking configuration incorrectly, I can restore just the networking configuration with Kasten K10. So that's how we view applications as a singular operational unit with application centricity. We're delivering automated policies, so we can deploy not only things like policies as code, but we can deploy these policies that you create automatically through multi-cluster capabilities. So we've got organizations that have dozens or even hundreds of Kubernetes clusters. We're able to manage them all together and create global policies. So policies can apply across clusters or globally or regionally. I can create tiers of policies like gold, silver, bronze, and have those applied automatically using Kubernetes labels. Right, so we're able to do automated policies to guarantee that the applications being delivered to your organizations are automatically getting a data protection, a policy applied to them. And it's really all about enforcing your organization's SLAs, guaranteeing that the applications that are being deployed are protected against a Kasten K10 policy. And we can deliver those policies dynamically through our graphical user interface or policies as code, and being able to deliver policies through CI/CD pipelines or right from policy-driven management through the APIs. So that's a really critical capabilities. Observability is critical. We need to have an understanding of what's happening in our environment. So through Kasten K10's intuitive UI and feature-rich dashboard, we're giving you all the visibility you need into what's happening inside of the environment. Right, so we're delivering real-time statistics into the data backup policies and processes, so you have a complete understanding of which policies are being run, which policies might be having an issue with being able to be protected, how long are my policies being run for, and we're coming with out-of-the-box dashboards and metrics and alerts all built into the application by default. So we can easily turn those on to give you complete visibility into your data protection environment, all driven by our feature-rich UI. How the architecture looks from a high level, right? So Kasten K10 is actually deployed as an application itself within the Kubernetes environment. So we're actually integrating natively into the Kubernetes APIs, so we can automatically in real time discover applications that are being deployed, or any changes to those applications that are being deployed within the organizations. We talk to the infrastructure on industry standard APIs as well, things that we call what we call CSI APIs, to talk to the underlying storage infrastructure. So there's no proprietary storage layer here. We're talking to the storage on their on native industry APIs, and we can support anything from block storage to file level storage to object storage as well. So bring your favorite infrastructure. It's going to be supported through industry standard APIs. And also, at that application layer, we have out of the box what we call our application framework or application blueprints. So all of the most popular cloud native applications being deployed, especially things like databases that are being deployed on top of Kubernetes, we've got out of the box integrated capabilities to do application consistency for those applications as well. You can see the fullest of the applications that are supported out of the box for Kasten K10 at docs.kasten.io. But what's great is we give you the ability to write your own blueprints. So for those custom applications that you're deploying on top of Kubernetes, you can write a blueprint right within our UI to talk to your application natively. So if your application has some native hooks to prepare the application for data protection, you can write those right into Kasten K10 blueprints and make those part of your backup policies. Kasten K10's ecosystem is the best in the industry. Now, we talked about the freedom of choice. From the data services layer, the most popular applications, just some of the applications that are supported out of the box are applications like Amazon RDS, Cassandra, SQL, Microsoft SQL, Mongo, MySQL, Postgres, and many more come right out of the box. And you're able to then, of course, write your own blueprints for your own native applications. We support essentially every Kubernetes distribution out there. Officially we say, if it's a CNCF certified Kubernetes distribution, it's going to be supported by Kasten. We've got the broadest range of storage infrastructure validation support as well in the industry. And then we've got key security partnerships out there that are delivering on the promise of complete security for your organization, to deliver guaranteed availability, guaranteed disaster recovery for your organizations, and guaranteeing the ability that you can protect against ransomware and DR events for your organization. With that, now I'd love to show you a demo of our product, because I believe once you see the product, I think you'll become a huge fan of it, just like I am. So let's jump right into that demo of Kasten K10, and I hope you like the product. So let's go right into it. We'll start in the Kasten K10 multi-cluster dashboard, where we have 2 clusters connected, EKS Anywhere on-prem and EKS in US East 2 for production. Here in the Kasten K10 dashboard, we'll start looking at our main screen and the applications that we have installed within our EKS Anywhere dev cluster. Our corporate website runs on our EKS dev cluster today, and it contains multiple pods with persistent volume claims. Switching over to our US East production cluster, you can see that no applications exist yet in this cluster. We're going to take a look at the K10 global resources and show that we have a global policy for data protection using Amazon AWS S3. Let's create our first global policy for the protection of our website application. Here in the Kasten K10 UI, we'll give the policy a name, select the snapshot frequency, and enable exports out to our AWS S3 location. You can select applications by name or labels. We'll select all of our policies and click Create Policy. Let's run this policy one time over in our EKS Anywhere dev cluster. This will protect our corporate website application. As you can see here in the Kasten K10 UI, we can follow the Actions window and the status of our data protection policy. Kasten K10 will run a snapshot and then export the application back up to AWS S3. Here's a look at our application running in our dev test Amazon EKS Anywhere cluster. We're ready to migrate this application into production, and we can use Kasten K10. Let's export this application so that we can now import it then into the EKS production cluster out on the US East 2 region. Let's create our first export policy, copy the encryption key, and we can watch the progress of the export here in the action window of Kasten K10. Once our export is complete, we'll switch over to our US East 2 production cluster and create a temporary import policy for this application. Give this import policy a name, choose restore after import, and the power of Kasten K10 allows us to dynamically change the characteristics of an application on import. For this application, we will need to change the storage class because the storage class on-prem is different than what's in our Amazon cluster in the public cloud. Once we apply those transformations to the import policy, let's paste in our encryption key, select our S3 target, and click Create Policy. Once our policy is created, let's run this policy once. This will start the import and migration of the application from EKS Anywhere into EKS Public Cloud. Here in the Actions window, we can watch the progress of the import. Once our import is complete, you can now see the application dynamically show up in the Kasten K10 UI. Our application import is complete. Now that our application has been migrated to production, let's delete it off of our dev test cluster. Let's use our kubectl command to delete our namespace for the corporate website. Once the corporate website namespace is deleted, you can see it removed from the Kasten K10 UI. This application now only exists in production on the US East 2 cluster. And let's validate that our application is now running in this new cluster. And here's our website completely running now in our production cluster. The migration was easy and simple with Kasten K10. Hope you liked that demo. Thank you all for spending your time with me today. I do want to leave you with a couple of things to check out after today's webinar. Number one, learning.kasten.io. So we are giving back to the community today, completely free Kubernetes training and learning site. You can go to learning.kasten.io today and start your learning journey around Kubernetes. You can start deploying your first Kubernetes clusters, your first applications, and learn about data protection, learn about storage, learn about everything you might need to do to start your journey into getting to production on Kubernetes. Now, what's really great about learning.kasten.io is this is real live Kubernetes clusters in your browser and completely free. This is not PowerPoint. This is not YouTube videos. Go to learning.kasten.io today and check that out. You can get free certifications and badges for your learning journey at learning.kasten.io. And of course, you can try Kasten K10 for free today. We've got a completely free edition out there that is completely unrestricted in terms of capabilities. Go out and check out the free edition of Kasten K10 at kasten.io/try-kasten-K10 today, or quick snap a picture of the QR codes on the screen right now. And with that, let's jump into our Q&A. And thank you again. My name is Adam Berg, and thank you again for spending some time with me today.
Okay, thanks, Adam, for that great presentation and that demo. Are you ready for some questions now from the audience?
Yeah, I know they're coming in fast and furious. I love it. So yes, let's get to some questions.
We have got a ton of them, which tells me that that people are really intrigued by everything Kubernetes can do, along with the challenges and complexity it brings. There's no doubt about it. We're going to start with a question from Nuru, who asks, we have 3 data centers and 8 Kubernetes clusters in the main data center. We need backup and disaster recovery without downtime. Is it possible to create a disaster recovery plan without creating a reserve cluster in other data centers? Is it possible with Veeam that when the main data center goes down, Kubernetes can be brought up on other data centers?
Yeah, so this is a great question. So um, a DR plan for Kubernetes doesn't necessarily mean you have to have, let's say, a hot standby cluster. When you do have a DR event, of course, you do need to get a Kubernetes cluster up and running. But the great thing about cloud-based Kubernetes today is that could be about a 5-minute event. For example, spinning up a new cluster on, let's say, Google Kubernetes service or Azure EKS could take just a few minutes, and then you could start a DR workflow right from there and have the cluster auto scale as you start bringing applications online. So it's much different than today, let's say a traditional DR type of approach where you have to have maybe like for like hardware or having a whole bunch of static, expensive hardware sitting around waiting for that DR event. You can absolutely have cold standby clusters, or let's say a 3-node cluster sitting there as your DR cluster, and then during a DR event, that cluster scales on demand. And that's really the power of cloud native approaches to the way that DR can be done. And Casting K10 absolutely supports those kinds of approaches for disaster recovery.
Great. Now, Rudy asked a question that I'm sure is on lots of people's minds, and this is about ransomware, which is just the plague of the industry right now. Rudy wants to know, how does the backup and restore functionality work in regards to
Yeah.
ransomware? So once you get attacked.
Yeah. So one of the key considerations for protection against ransomware, and your backup and recovery really is what we call the last line of defense against ransomware. You want to guarantee that no matter what happens in your environment, if you're fully compromised by ransomware or even insider threats, let's take the sort of the idea of a rogue administrator who knows the passwords to everything, has the root credentials to all your cloud accounts and everything like this. How do you protect against attacks like that? And the way that we approach that is through what we call the immutability of your backups. And what we mean by immutability of backups means your protected applications can't be modified, they can't be deleted, they can't be changed in any way by ransomware, by rogue administrators, by full compromise, meaning that we're guaranteed to have our data available and recoverable in an unchanged way. And the way that we support that is through what we call object lock API support for object lock, S3 compatible object lock storage. So that's it's an API for S3 compatible storages. So think of there's a lot of organizations that support that, like not only AWS object storage, but there's some popular ones out there that it's supported by Wasabi and Cloudian and Backblaze and MinIO and many others. NetApp Storage Grid. There's a lot of object storage providers, so you can really pick your favorite provider that supports object lock API support for the immutable protection of ransomware. And that's really the core of the ransomware strategy, is making sure that your data is always safe and secure, no matter what. Even if you're completely compromised, we can have that data be recoverable.
And that immutability, of course, is basically the only way to ensure that you don't lose anything. That also incidentally answers James's question, who asked, are immutable backups supported? Well, there is your answer, James. Matt wants to know, are there data retention settings for how long daily, weekly, and monthly data backups are retained for OneDrive files? For mailboxes, can emails older than, for instance, 60 months be deleted from backup? And he wants to know, is there an option for unlimited retention?
So I think that question is probably for a different product. When you start talking about email, start talking about OneDrive, that's Office 365. So that's Veeam has a separate product for that. So you're in luck. So the answer to all of that is yes, but you're talking to the wrong product team. You want to go talk to the Veeam Office 365 backup product. I believe I posted a link to the landing page for that product. But yeah, absolutely. Veeam has you covered. If you're an Office 365 customer in OneDrive and with all your emails up there, you absolutely do need to protect that. And Veeam offers the best in class solution for that product as well.
And it's very comprehensive. Matt wants to know, does
Yep.
Kasten offer a data isolation or recovery solution to minimize the impact of a potential cyber attack?
Yeah, and I think that sort of goes back to the previous question around ransomware, right? Right, for a cyber attack, right, including ransomware, you want to make sure that your data is isolated from your primary location. So let's say you're on-premises Kubernetes, or maybe you're in the public cloud. You want to have a copy that's separated from the primary copy of the data, and you want to employ immutable technologies. So if you're backing up, if you're an on-prem Kubernetes customer, you want to make sure that, of course, you have local snapshots for fast recovery, but you want to have an offsite immutable copy of that data as well, and that's fully supported by the Kasten K10. And that's really a best practice, is to have an immutable copy of your data, and it's literally just a check mark within our UI to enable that immutable capabilities when you're doing data protection.
Great. Rocio wants to know, how do you license Kasten K10?
Yep, that's a great question. We license per worker node in a cluster, right? So we don't have any license tiers. It's basically our enterprise product, which is you get all the capabilities and you get full enterprise 24/7 support based on the number of worker nodes in your cluster. We do have a completely free edition as well. So if you're 5 worker nodes and less, Kasten K10 is completely free with no restrictions, no missing features, and that's with community support. So if you've got some test clusters, or maybe all your clusters are 5 nodes and less, you can use Kasten K10 completely unrestricted with the Kasten K10 free edition. So I do recommend you to go out and check us out and install us in your test dev clusters or your 5 node and less clusters completely free.
Great. Here's a question that probably a lot of people are thinking about that is certainly worth addressing. There are free and open source backup solutions and object storage in the Kubernetes space. So given that, why should enterprises consider a commercial product like yours, for example?
Yeah, this is an amazing question, and one that we get a lot. Of course, we're playing in a largely open source community. Kubernetes is open source. A lot of the applications that are being deployed on top of Kubernetes are open source. Why shouldn't my backup products also be open source? Well, I guess the question is here. Open source. This is kind of funny. I like to use this analogy. Open source is free, sort of like a puppy is free. What does it really cost you to run a free and open source product that, number one, probably has no enterprise support behind it? It probably doesn't have the capabilities that a commercial product has. For example, the capabilities that Kasten K10 is delivering, not only the best in class and highest performing enterprise scalable data protection for backup and recovery. We're delivering capabilities like enabled encryption, deduplication, and compression as part of that backup. Things like application mobility and full cluster disaster recovery aren't capabilities you're going to find in any free and open source product. And then 24/7 enterprise support behind your product, delivering on-demand bug fixes and feature requests for our enterprise customers certainly is not something that you get in a community-supported open source product. And then, of course, data is your most valuable asset to most organizations. I think you definitely want to have a support organization standing behind you on that. And of course, we recently released a new white paper for one of our customers who stated that they're saving 150 man hours in their backup processes by moving to Kasten K10 versus a self-managed and open source product that they were coming from. So that's real money savings by moving to a commercial product. In this particular case, 150 hours per month saved by moving to Kasten K10.
It is. And I mean, Kubernetes is really specialized in terms of the knowledge base that you need to have. And a lot of folks don't have it. Veeam does have it.
Yeah.
And that can't be overlooked, the time savings there.
Yeah, and
Um,
we're delivering, our product in a really easy, consumable way, and you saw it in our demo with our UIs, which are best in the industry as well.
Sure, sure. One question I had early on from your presentation, you were talking about the rise of virtualization, although that seems like ancient news now. It's still in every data center, that's out there. So what is different about backup and recovery when it comes to a Kubernetes environment and a traditional virtualization environment, which for most people on this webinar think of as a traditional VMware environment?
Right. Yeah, and that's another great question. Largely, cloud native based applications are constructed vastly different than a traditional virtual machine. An application in a cloud native approach is could be several or dozens or even hundreds of what we call microservices, meaning different containers and different pods, each with their unique metadata, each with their unique configuration and secrets. Um, and each with individual persistent volumes attached to those individual microservices. And these pods for a singular application could be running across any number of nodes within a cluster. So taking an application cloud native approach and having native visibility into those applications is something that's very specialized. And you definitely need a tool that sort of is born in this space. So Kasten K10 was born just for Kubernetes-based applications, and that's all we protect. So yeah, it's vastly different in terms of the construction of the application, the amount of different pieces of metadata that make up a Kubernetes-based application is vastly different than a traditional virtual machine, as it were. So yeah, you're going to find a lot of differences in terms of how an application is constructed in Kubernetes. So you certainly want to make sure that you're not trying to take a traditional legacy type backup application that maybe starts to dip their toe into Kubernetes data protection. Definitely want a dedicated product like Kasten K10 to protect your containerized applications.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Bradford asked an interesting question. He asked, does casting K10 require SSD or other performance class storage? So can you run it on a spinning disk array, or does it need
Yeah.
that solid state drive?
Yeah, so Casting K10 itself is a Kubernetes-based application we install right within your cluster. And the way that we actually perform a backup is first we create a local snapshot of the application, and then we back that application up to some sort of external target, like a object storage target, or it could be an NFS target, or we even now support Veeam backup and replication targets. Now, all of that is sort of independent of the quality of disk that's running underneath, right? So um, largely we're agnostic to the hardware, right? And that's really what cloud native really means. We're sort of the level of hardware that you're running your applications on is sort of invisible to us. As we're all sort of API driven, and that's one of the major differences between cloud native applications and sort of traditional. Is we like to be as API driven as possible. So when we talk to underlying infrastructure, we're talking on standard APIs that we call CSI APIs to request a snapshot. And we talk to object storage as talking over a standard API. So absolutely, the level of performance that you need for your applications is what you should choose, and it's not really a consideration for a product like Kasten.
That's great. So customization, no lock-in then that's
Right,
being
absolutely.
offered
Yeah, we're
also.
completely agnostic to the infrastructure, which makes us very flexible. You get to pick the hardware you want to run on. You get to pick the distribution of Kubernetes. You get to pick the cloud provider. You get to pick the yeah.
Right.
We work with everything, right? So that's where our customers love us. They could be on one cloud provider today and decide they want to move to a different cloud provider, or they're running OpenShift and Tanzu on prem, but up in production might be GKE and AKS, right? We work with all of them so we can be a common platform for all of that. And then we can unify that visibility into a single, what we call multi-cluster UI dashboard, which we didn't demonstrate today. I think we did. Yeah, we demonstrated that a little bit, right? Where you can see multiple clusters within the same UI,
Right.
regardless of whether they're on-prem in the public cloud. You have complete visibility into that.
So no, what you're saying is another way of saying also we work with whatever you've got,
You
right?
got
You,
it.
you
Yeah, that's
don't
right.
you
Yeah,
don't
whatever you
need,
want,
yeah,
it's going to
yeah.
work with
But
us, right?
that's
Right.
crucial
Yeah,
for people, with budgetary considerations and such,
absolutely. Yeah.
So that is okay. We are running out of time. Let's ask one final question here, and this is from Lee, who asks, is there a cap to the number of clusters that can be added in that environment?
We haven't seen a cap. We've got customers with hundreds of clusters within our multi-cluster UI. I mean, I guess I'd have to go back to our engineering to see what we've actually tested. I haven't heard of anyone saying that we've got a cap to the number of clusters that can be visible within the in the multi-cluster UI. Certainly, what we've seen is the rise of what we call edge-based Kubernetes distributions. So you'll see things like single node Kubernetes clusters, K3s or Amazon EKS Anywhere are popular examples of this. We see Kubernetes now running inside vehicles, inside of at edges, at individual stores. If you're a retailer, so we certainly have customers that are running hundreds of clusters and unifying the data protection into a single K10 user interface, which is very, very powerful and a unique capability that we're delivering.
Yeah, that is awesome. So let's wrap this up then. Adam, if somebody wants to get started with Veeam or find out more about Kasten and K10, what would you recommend they do next?
Yeah, absolutely. Go to kasten.io. That's our main page. You'll find our contact information if you want to reach out to talk to our engineers, if you want to talk to our sales reps, if you want to get a demo. We're certainly there to work with you in your organization. You can also find the details on how to install Kasten completely free without talking to anybody at Kasten in your cluster over at kasten.io. And all our documentation is at docs.kasten.io. And then, of course, don't forget about our free learning platform. If you want to learn more about just Kubernetes in general, start getting your first badges and certifications there at learning.kasten.io. I highly recommend that.
Great, and free is good, isn't it?
Free, completely
We all
free.
like
Yep.
free. All right. Well, thanks so much, Adam, for putting together a really informative presentation and demo, and for all of your insights in the Q&A. It was fascinating for me, and I think for our listeners today, and we really appreciate all the time you spent with us today.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for having me. And again, thank you for everyone who chose to take some time out of your day to spend some time with me.
Thank you. Okay, so before we wrap up today, we have one more piece of business, which is the $300 Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of that $300 Amazon gift card today is Nick Zeppa from Washington. Congratulations, Nick. We'll be in touch with you soon to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Veeam for making this event possible. And thanks as always for attending and for your great questions. That concludes today's event. Hope you had a really informative time and hope you have a great rest of your day.